Hello and welcome. It's Alexa Linton here, your host for the Whole Horse Podcast. We're here to look at all the ways that the horse industry is changing before our very eyes in very cool, very amazing ways. And we're chatting with the people at the forefront of that change, the professionals, the trainers, the body workers, the researchers that are helping our lives with horses become better and better. Thanks for being here. I love that you're here and listening and learning. And if you ever have a guest that you want to suggest or a topic that you want to hear, just let me know, and I'd love to hear from you. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Whole Horse Podcast. It's Alexa Linton here, and I'm very excited to be here today with Lockie Phillips of Emotional Horsemanship. Welcome, Lockie.
Hello, it's such a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. Lockie just shared this amazing little bit of fact here that this was the very first podcast he ever listened to, and I'm
ever.
I'm
so
yeah,
it's super cool to be here. Yeah.
Aw, it's very, I mean, there's so much that you're doing. I follow Lockie on Instagram at Emotional Horsemanship, and honestly, if you're not following him yet, please get on over there. And if you're an Instagram person and follow along, his posts move me so much and have really shifted the way I think about so many things. And it's well worth a read. I think the work that he's doing is very important. So Lockie, before we get started, can you give us sort of a Cole's Notes version of you, your work, and how you got to this point in time?
Okay, so I was born in Australia. My name is Lachlan, but this is really difficult for some people. But my whole life I've been called Lockie by my friends and my family, so that's just my name now. And so I was born in Australia, and I have a really unusual root. I don't come from a horsey family. I had a horse person in my family, but my immediate family wasn't into horses. And I was actually a professional ballet dancer for about 10 years. Working primarily in Europe. So my life was about dance and horses as a child. And then dance took over and led me to Europe. And I sort of bounced around Europe for a while, and then I found myself with a really good job in Poland. And I realized I had spare time, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life as a dancer sort of planning my weekends around going to the supermarket. So I realized I needed a hobby, and I asked myself a really powerful question. It's, what did I love before dance took over? And the first answer within nanoseconds was horses. So I tried a few lessons at sort of local stables, but I really didn't vibe with their kind of mechanical approach to riding. I really wanted to understand horses on a deeper level. And so I did some research, and I found a really great little stable in Poland that just took me under their wing, and they taught me everything they know. And I became a trainer, and then I started teaching people. And then I was going to Spain every summer, and I started teaching people there. And so it sort of snowballed from there. And after about 6-7 years with horses, it became clear that I had more to offer horses than I did dance. And so I made a radical decision and switched my life over, and I bought a horse, and he's been by my side whilst that happened. And now I've got another, and now I live here in Spain, and horses are my full-time occupation since almost 4 years. So yeah, that's the Cliff Notes version, you could say, of my life.
Amazing. And your focus on emotion and empathy and this world that my listeners would know I adore, diving more into understanding more. How did that occur? How did that part of horsemanship come to the table for you?
It was never not at the table for me. Mm-hmm. So that was never not an option. I never had to make a conscious decision to involve myself in this aspect of being with horses. It's just like second nature for me that it is empathy driven, and it is feel based, and it does bring up emotions in people. But however, from a business perspective, for a number of years, I was just teaching, quote, horsemanship to be. I just called it horsemanship. And then when they were coming to me, these students, these clients, always emotions would come to the surface, not within minutes, within seconds of them arriving at the lesson. And they'd get into the saddle, and by riding, all these things would just sort of come to the surface. And then speaking to some of my mentors who were my teachers, they would kind of say, when all the clients had gone home and we're sitting around the table having coffee, would all kind of lean forward and just say, you know, it's always emotion that comes to the surface in these lessons. But it was like a little trade secret. And so I looked out there and I looked at the quote industry, especially the ethical industry around horses, which is really quite sizable now. And there were people talking about emotions. I'm certainly not the only one out there. There are really powerful voices out there talking about emotion, but they're not occupying it in a primary way. And there are people who are talking about emotion, but they filter it first through a certain technique, or they filter it through liberty training, or they filter it through whatever they're doing. And I thought, there's no one out there who's really occupying an empathy-driven approach. Because at the end of the day, we just want to connect with the animal. You know, on your deathbed, I hate to get morbid so quick, but on your deathbed, you're not going to be thinking about what you did with your horse. You're going to be remembering those small moments that felt really important to you. And I thought that's what's most important to most people I know. And then COVID came around and I was like, well, hell, I got nothing else to lose. Let me just, quote, come out of the closet with my own business and call it what it is. And it is emotional horsemanship. And it's not about being Meryl Streep with horses and running around with your hand on your forehead, kind of being dramatic about stuff. It's really not like that. And it's not about crying or being cathartic or using horses as therapy. It's not about that. It's normal horsemanship with normal goals of riding and training and doing what you want to do. But we focus on how the horse feels before we focus on what the horse does. Because a horse can do a variety of things for you, but if they don't feel good about how they got there, we're kind of missing the point. And as a dancer, I had a really powerful point of reference for being able to empathize with horses in this capacity. And that was with me from the beginning of my learning with horses as well. So yeah, that's kind of why it's called emotional horsemanship. But yeah, I think people probably misunderstand that from me and my work quite quickly. And it was also a really conscious choice on my part to use the word emotional in my business, because that's going to automatically filter out a lot of people who might not be right in working with me. So the people who come my way, I don't have to I'm not suspicious about any of clients that come my way, because I already know that they're the right person that I need to be working with, because they're brave enough to go past that word and they don't have any taboo around feelings. So yeah.
I love this, because I mean, for me, I am what I would probably be your ideal client if I lived in Spain.
Well, I work primarily online.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, 95% of my business is online. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. That's very good to know. You know, one of the things I've worked through over the years is, and I think many will relate, is how my emotions feel like they, quote unquote, get in the way of my horsemanship, or limit my horsemanship experience or my connection with my horses. And it sounds like that's something that you know, through your posts and through reading your work, something that you really, you know, get into more is how people can work with their empathy, their neurodivergence, their nervous system to actually, you know, support their relationship with their horses rather than feel like it's a hindrance to that relationship.
Oh my God, that's the first time I've actually been asked that question. And it's a really important one to me. And if I could make one difference for some people, it would be to remove shame and remove judgment around how they feel, or remove the concept that your emotions are a block into being good with horses. Because this is when the waters start to get muddy because of the way the human brain works. And I just want to start by saying that the first thing you said today was that my posts moved you. Now, you hit the nail on the head there because they moved you. You had emotions about it. But emotion and movement are intimately connected within the brain. They swirl within the same soup in the brain, and they form very similar neural connections. So if you're training a mover, which is a horse, if you're training movement, which is horse riding, emotions are part of the picture. Now, the way the human brain works is that we have this huge prefrontal cortex, the modern abstract brain, which in terms of evolutionary standards is very immature, very recent, very new, and still got a number of glitches. If it was a computer, we could say it's got a few bugs it needs working on. And one of these bugs the human brain has is this disconnect between what we think and what we feel in our body. Now, horses don't have that disconnect. Animals don't have that disconnect. Certain people with neurodivergence don't have that disconnect. Children don't have that disconnect, and certain adults who are really, really aligned with spiritual practices, mindfulness practices, or even really, really good horse people, at least when they're working with horses, they don't have that going on. They're able to join those dots. But most of us, let's say lay people, we have this heavy thinking brain, and then we have this heavy emotional brain. Now, what we saw like 20, 30 years ago with the rise of natural horsemanship, the prelude into the positive reinforcement that's now starting to kind of take over, was the rise in psychology-driven training, where we base training protocols with horses on the way horses think and process information and make decisions. Yet, as a species, horses and humans are incredibly neurodivergent in the way we think. Horses think very differently from us, and we think in very different ways from horses. That's thought, right? This is decision making, this is abstract thought. And then the emotional aspect, well, as a species between horse and humans, there is almost no difference in the way we process movement, memory, and emotion than the way a horse processes movement, memory, and emotion. And this is not my idea. This is just robust science. Yes. So why are we making so many training protocols based upon how we are different as a species? Why not start where we are the most alike? And that's what empathy is. How are we alike in this moment? So when we say that emotions get in our way, usually emotions that have gone over threshold are emotions that our heavy human brain has suppressed and tried to control or sweep under the rug, not acknowledge, not deal with, not process, not mature them. But if we learn how to radically process our emotional states, which is what has given the rise of a multi-billion-dollar therapy industry, people learning how to process their emotions. If we learn how to process our emotions and actively use them in our day-to-day life without suppression, control, all these sort of things, then emotions don't get in the way. They actually are the fuel to our fire, and they are our superpower. And if emotions are getting in your way, it's either your thoughts about your emotions, so that's your human brain standing in the way, not your emotions. That's your thoughts standing in the way, not your emotions. So being able to know and understand some of those really basic science elements enables us to kind of clear out those waters a little bit and understand the difference between what is emotion, what is thought and opinion. And if you think your emotions are holding you back, you're actually using an opinion, which is a thought, and the thought is holding you back. The emotion's not holding you back. The emotion's there, and you just need to learn how to work with it. So it's about how to wrangle human brain and bring back a connection to our body. And because I was a dancer and I trained as a dancer my whole life, if I've got one thing going for me that some people don't have, it's that I never lost that connection to my body growing up. So I've never lost that. So, and I teach that to people now, help people rewild themselves in a way or reconnect and come back to their body and use their emotional state to train.
And I, interestingly enough, also raised as a dancer.
Were you? Oh my God, stop it. What did you learn? What did you learn?
Oh, I was in all the things. I was ballet, modern, jazz, Hip
Me
hop.
too.
Oh yeah.
I wasn't much of a hip hop, I have to
I
say.
know I was
I'm
very
too
bad
white.
at it. I was very bad at it.
Mm-mm.
Um, I one of my claims to fame is that in our high school we did a modern dance routine with the princes watching, like
Oh my
literally
God.
Prince Harry, the
Uh,
whole Will, everybody was there. It was quite embarrassing. Yes.
And
But
here's the thing I've noticed, they come out of the woodwork. As soon as I mention that, hey, I was a
dancer.
dancer, I was raised a dancer, and I'm into horses, suddenly all these other people say, yeah, I learned to
Yep.
dance as a child as well. Or
Oh
people
yeah.
who were professional dancers and they're into horses. One of my close friends, he was like a super world famous dancer, and now he has retired and he's got his farm in Holland and he's got Dutch warm bloods. So we're out
Absolutely.
there.
We're out
We're out there.
there. And I actually
Mm,
encourage a lot of the time, even in the apprenticeship. I remember when I was doing in-person courses and I would wrangle all of my students and I would create a playlist and I was like, okay, everyone, even if you've
we're
got
gonna
to
move.
close your eyes, we're gonna
Yeah.
we're gonna dance this out. It
Yeah.
was so interesting. The very first emotion that would come up was shame.
Mm,
Right away, this embarrassment that would happen
mm,
for everyone. And I'd be like, if you need to turn around, you can do that. It was this whole thing of allowing ourselves to move freely in a space. Once they got going, they really enjoyed it, but it was always like, do we have, and there
mm,
would usually be at least a couple in the group that were like, yes, we get to do this. This is great. But I
mm,
really saw how those, and maybe we don't even call them emotions, but maybe it's a thought of like,
mm,
this is going to be embarrassing. People are going to
mm,
judge me. I'm going to be criticized for this, that
mm, mm,
blocked their way of moving freely in their
mm,
body. And I'm sure you see that a
mm,
lot, not only with
mm,
dancing, but also with riding as well. When we're asked to
mhm,
do novel movements and things that are different for us and might be strange, feel strange in our system. How does that land in the work that you do when
mm.
that's going to be a sort of pathway to someone's greater connection or greater ability in their writing?
Mm. So, I'm so glad you said the word shame because it's something I talk about all the time with
Mm-hmm.
my clients. And I believe, this is again my thought, but I believe that shame is the number one obstacle that we face as horse people because horses just move and they don't judge their movement. Children, they just move, they don't judge how they move. Uh, People who are shameless, they just move, they don't judge how they move, and horses respond to that. And so the fear of looking stupid or not trusting your body, this isn't a natural thing. This is something we're taught, we're conditioned by society. The unspoken signals are everywhere growing up. Through teenage years, you're taught to be ashamed of yourself. And shame is a tool that is used to control. It's used to control populations because if we all realized how beautiful and powerful we are and how capable we all are, we would be a lot to
Mm-hmm.
handle. Um, so shame is something that is taught and conditioned. It also comes way back when, hundreds of years ago, from glorifying punishment. Glorifying punishment as a form of purity and all this sort of self-deprecation. Um, Humility is good. We want humility because humility says that I know who came before me and I'm humble before the horse and what I've learned. False modesty is not good, and shame is just a toxic poison that will just continue to hold you back. And I've got to be really careful when I have a client in front of me that I've identified that they're struggling with shame, because when you point it out, it can be a really sore point for people. So I do go really delicately with this. Um, and I had a really good mentor. I got really lucky when I was 17 at my arts college in Melbourne. We had performance psychology lessons. from a wonderful woman called Dr. Paulette Mifsud. And at the beginning, I thought this was nonsense because she was doing guided meditations. And I thought, great, an opportunity for me to have a nap now, you know. And then she was doing concentration profiling on us one day. And she sat in front of me and she said, Lachlan, do you ever struggle in your lessons because of X? Does this ever happen to you when you're learning a skill? And she just named off this huge list. I was like, oh my God. And she says, I can help you. And so I started coaching with her, and then we became really good friends over the years. And she was with me all through my training. She was with me through so much when I got into horses as well. She worked with Australia's Olympic athletes. She worked with equestrians. She worked with musicians, with dancers, with track and field. She worked with everyone. She was one of Australia's top sports performance psychologists. And she was training me up to be a performance psychologist, and we were working on a business together. And one day she called me, and I was feeding horses in Spain, and she said, I'm sick. I got cancer, and I plan on being here, but if I'm not, quote, will you take up the flag for me and continue my work? And I said, yes. She said I was like a son to her, and she died a year later. Mm. And so through my work, I really lived her. And she was an expert in positive psychology before it was popular. So when people are coming to me with neurodivergence or shame or emotional issues or blockages, I'm doing this in a haphazard way and using the training that Paulette taught me and the compassion she taught me as well. Yeah. Mm. So, yeah.
Thanks, Lachlan.
Yeah.
That is really quite I'm sorry about your friend, and she sounds like
I miss her every day. I miss her every day. But she was a really important person to me because she really taught me how to improve my performance without being ashamed of myself in the process. And instead of working on a what's wrong with us and how do I fix it driven approach, it was what is right with us and how can I capitalize on that? And that is fundamentally the way I approach working with horses and working with people. We acknowledge what's going wrong. We acknowledge what could be better. We acknowledge our weaknesses. But if we spend all of our time and energy focusing on what's wrong, that's what gets better, or it just takes a long time to get better. But if we focus on what's going right, really focus on that, things tend to start to get better a lot faster. But again, it's not the toxic positivity of ignoring what's going wrong. You have to pay attention to what's not working. You have to observe it, but don't engage with it. So shame comes up all the time. And this is how I approach with it in my work with people. I point it out in a way that they can understand. But usually I wait, especially if I'm working one-on-one with someone online. I wait until we get to know each other really well and I know how they communicate, and I can communicate it to them in a way which doesn't break their spirit or make them feel even further ashamed of themselves. I really, really, really try to be a safe place for people, because I understand that when we're dealing with horses, the people like us, quote us, horses aren't sport equipment to us. They're not a livestock animal that we use. They are our most important possession, if possession is a word we want to use. They're sometimes the most important thing in some people's lives is their horse. And so I'm on hallowed ground. I'm on sacred ground when someone's coming to me about their horses. That's sacred to them. That's sacred to them. And I honor that. And I will never shame someone for, even when horses are presented to me with, welfare issues. If they've come to me for help, then there's no need to shame them for it. And this is what I see a lot online, maybe less on Instagram, a little bit more on Facebook, is this whole shaming attitude in fighting, even amongst ethical professionals. You're not doing it right. That's not how you do R+. That's not how you do R-. All this sort of stuff. I just think it's a huge waste of time. And isn't our energy better spent just making horses' lives better? Or maybe I'm an idealist. I don't know.
No, I think, that's I mean, I'm the kind of person who loves to think bigger perspective. That's always been, I think, one of my superpowers, is to be able to step back and go, okay, so where are we wanting to go, and is this helping us to get there? And I've been really enjoying your posts on various things. You've been posting about the use of food rewards, for example, and the combination of, like you say, R plus, R minus training, and where is pressure helpful, and these sorts of things. And these are questions that I live every day, with my girls and beyond. And I think many of us live and get confused around, because there is so much. We live in a time of so much information, and so much resources, so many opportunities to try things out. And there's so much in that, and I want to come back around to it. But, for you, when you sort of step back, bigger picture, and really look, what is that sort of, it sounds like that overwhelming desire to support the well-being of horses. What else kind of do you see from that perspective when you look at the world now and all this ethical training that's coming through, which is amazing. Like, it's just so great. But this infighting, this, like, it should be this way, it should be this way, it should be this way. Where do you kind of start to go, okay, like, I'm seeing the bigger picture, and I see maybe a way forward in this space?
I have to be really careful now, because I have the tendency just to put my foot in it, and I'll get cancelled so quickly. Because I come into horses from an unusual background, and because I've spent so long working with people whose English is not their first language, 15 years, I'm around people whose English is not their first language, I can just stumble into a cultural faux pas and not even know it, and I could get cancelled so quickly. But anyway, I'm just going to go there, and I'm going to say I get really concerned when I see people not changing at all their human condition, and just changing their behaviors and approaches towards horses. So you'll see people who maybe had a history of really aversive training with horses, heavy bits, heavy spurs, heavy whip, heavy pressure, pushing, and then they have a come to Jesus moment, and they do a flip, total reversal into pure positive, clicker, high rate of external reinforcement, protected contact, all of it. And sometimes, not everyone, sometimes I see they've got the same human attitude, they're just wearing different clothes. They haven't changed anything internally, they've just put on a different hat. They're still shaming people who aren't doing it the way they do it. They're still putting huge pressure on horses. It's a different kind of pressure. It's a positive pressure to perform. That's still a pressure. Positive pressure of constant puzzles to solve. And if you solve it, you get this reward. If you solve it, you get this reward. If you solve it, you get this reward. That's another form of pressure. Again, I'm going to get cancelled for saying all of the above, but again, there will be people listening who'll be sitting here going, right on, Lockie, right on. This is how I feel, right? So I'm speaking to them. What's important is that we take a look at ourselves. If you are interested in improving the experience your horse has in training, first stop and look at what you are bringing to the table. And I'm not going to use the word energy, because I think it's overused, though I understand its approach, and I used it a lot myself in the past. I'm just going to say, let's look at how we treat each other. Let's look at how we communicate to other people about what we do and how we do it. And if you're using any kind of sanctimonious shaming, or using any kind of science or training protocol as a baton to beat other people down with, maybe you've still got the stick, it just looks a little bit different.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what I'm concerned about in the modern training. However, 99.99% of all of this ethical training that we see on the rise is fabulous. I love it. I support it. I'm here for it. Let's go for it. Food in training is fabulous. Point. End of sentence. Let's move on. What's the next conversation? That's
Yeah.
where I am
Yeah.
personally.
Okay.
That's where I'm at. I'm not even at a point where I feel the need to defend the use of food in training, because there's no one around me who I feel the need to defend the use of food in training too. That doesn't mean I'm not around people who would disapprove of the use of food in training. I've worked very closely with people who highly disapprove of the use of food in training.
Mm-hmm.
Even within the last 6 months, highly closely with such people. I just don't feel the need to defend the use of why I'm using food.
Yeah.
Food is fabulous in training. Let's move on. What's the next conversation? What's the next development? That's what I'm interested in. I want to keep the ball rolling. Let's keep this going.
Yeah.
Let's not say, oh, food is the most ethical end of. Oh, okay, great. So for the rest of my life, that's it. That's all we've learned. That's all there is to the story. Oh, that's a bit depressing. Surely there's more than that. In terms of animal training, we've only just touched on B.F. Skinner's work from 1937 of operant conditioning. We've only just got there after how many years with animals by our side? Since B.F. Skinner, there were at least 9 other subsequent learning theories developed by scientists, which could be applied to animals. They could be applied to animals, at least on an emotional level. So that's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And many of those subsequent 9 learning theories not only were critical of operant conditioning, but were scathingly critical of operant conditioning. Jaak Panksepp, who, is Effective Neuroscience, on page 4 of Effective Neuroscience, he says that operant conditioning is not enough to understand the affective experience of animals. Behaviorism is not enough. It's not enough. And that's very robust science that's freely and widely accepted by the ethical training community. So, this is sort of the big picture that I kind of dance around in.
Yeah.
Maybe we can pick a specific point to dive off into a bit more.
One of the things I have a few things that I'm super curious about. One of them is your conversation about the use of food rewards. I found that very interesting. You shared a graph the other day of, some of the differences in I think the physiology that happen with different applications of food rewards. And I think, I'm a lifelong learner. I don't think anybody in this podcast that's going to come as a shock. Constantly going down, I want to explore this rabbit hole, and this looks interesting. And I was the rider that had, let's see, like a Western saddle and an English bridle and
I love it.
Right. Like I don't even know what was happening. People would literally giggle when I came into the ring, because it was just a mess, but it was how, I was like, I want to express myself. Tie-dye shirt. I remember one time going into I was at a bridle horse clinic with Bruce Sandifer, and I literally rode Diva into the ring bareback with a pair of Birkenstocks on.
Oh my God.
The clinic, and he
no
just looked
shame.
at me and went, wow, okay.
Right on. Right on.
And that's kind of how I've been in my horsemanship as well, is, well, let's see what works. Each horse is different. My 2 girls are so different in the way that they learn and train. And so, I'm curious here around this, for you, the use of food rewards. I tend to use it more like what you were sharing, sort of intermittent, like surprising, and more because I forget that to use them sometimes. I don't have any in my pocket, or, right. And then I'm like, I brought a carrot, and, but just, can you go into the physiology a little bit of some of what happens with the different types of use of food rewards?
Sure. So I'm not taking full credit for what I'm going to talk about now. It actually is something with my friend and colleague Andrea Mills from Andrea Mills Horsemanship and Hoof Care. She's really, really awesome. And she started a Facebook group about 10 days ago called Cherry on Top Trainers, where she's creating a safe place for people who mix and blend reinforcement protocols that is free from shaming, from either side or either camp. And like Warwick Schiller's there, she's there, there are some clicker trainers there. And the group's like less than 50 people at this point.
Wow.
Anyway, so we were discussing in there dopamine activity in the use of food reward. And dopamine is like the reward hormone, right? So this is what a lot of R plus trainers are really using when it's coming to positive reinforcement. They're relying upon dopamine activity in the blood as evidence that the horse feels rewarded and is having a positive time during the training. The problem is that we have a difference between the cue and the reward and when dopamine is released in the system. If the reward is unexpected, they didn't expect it, then when they get the reward, that is when the dopamine gets released at the same time. So that's when the learning occurs in relationship to the reward. When they didn't expect to get it, that's when the dopamine gets released. When they have expected the reward for the behavior, then the dopamine is released when they are cued to do the behavior, but not when they get the reward. So when you ask them to do it, already the dopamine is released into the system because they're expecting that the reward is coming. In a layman's terms, anticipation of the food reward. And this is when you start to see the anxiety come. This is because the dopamine has already been released before they got the reward. Then you have something called negative prediction error or dopamine dumping. This is what eventually it devolves into. So if they start to get rewarded with dopamine from the cue, when they get the reward, dopamine does like a negative sync. It's like a dump out of the system because the brain is actually rewired to constantly require an increase in the value of the reward. And if the value of the reward is not constantly increasing in expectation, then they start getting like dopamine dumping. And that's when you start to see all of these frustration behaviors associated with food rewards. And then maybe you do need protected contact from some of these animals. If they expect the reward and they get the reward and they don't have the satisfaction, it's a little bit like that addictive personality. Like once you start, you see with drug addicts all the time, they need more and more and more to get the same high. So the reason why I practice something I call reinforcement minimal is not because I'm trying to ignore the science. It's because I'm trying to set up food rewards in a way which the horse never expects to get it. But when they get it, they love it and they get rewarded when they get it. They're not getting rewarded for the cue. They're getting rewarded when they get it. So I do various things to enable this to happen. I'll train with food rewards sometimes and then not others. I'll reward sometimes and not others. Sometimes I will cue, they do the reward, and then I stop and I breathe with them. And then I reward moments later, which is sometimes highly frowned upon by some people to have latency. Or I will allow the horse to have huge latency between the cue and the reward. And this is something that's talked about in Panksepp's effective neuroscience, which is the emotion of mammals neurologically. He says that between the stimulus and the response, there is something happening in the brain. We don't know what it is. No one knows. We lack the tools to study it. It's like trying to study the cell without the microscope. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We just can't study it. So therefore, there is no data on what happens between the stimulus and the response in the brain. Now, some people who are working only with data-driven protocols, because there is no data in that latency between stimulus and response, what they've done is eliminate that latency, and they'll go stimulus, response, stimulus, response, stimulus, response.
Right.
Cue, reward, cue, reward, cue, reward, cue, reward, without any moment in the middle for processing or breathing or feeling, whatever it is. We don't know what it is. Scientists don't have the tools to study it. This is what they say. They know it's there. They just don't have the tools. So I really like to lean into that latency, lean into it with feel, with emotional awareness, and allow the horse time to process in between my stimulus and their response. The natural horsemanship people and the old-fashioned trainers, they would just say it was feel and timing. Give the horse time to think. Give the horse time to think. And I'd like to see that come back with some of these more modern protocols driven by science. I'd like to see a little bit more of that come back. Allowing the horse to say no, allowing the horse to think for a minute, allowing the horse to have a different idea, and sort of removing this concept of wanted versus unwanted behavior, which is another conversation entirely. But yeah, that's a Cliff's Notes version of some of the physiology around dopamine dumping and expected food rewards, and what happens when horses expect the reward and then get it and are dissatisfied when they get it because it's not big enough.
Yes, that's very, very interesting. And I was reading your post on, this idea of when we label behaviors as wanted or unwanted. I found that very interesting and helpful. Just to I think one of the things that I've noticed about your posts, Lockie, is that it's like I've had this thought like way at the back of my head, and it's never been, it's like,
and you couldn't put words to it.
It's like I couldn't put words to it, but I was like, I have a sense of this thing. Like, I don't know, and I'm not a trainer, right? So when it comes to training things, I think I've always had a bit of a like, what did you call it? False modesty, like where I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing,
No, I don't know what I'm doing.
But it was quite funny because Shannon from Humming Horse came out and worked with me in Diva.
I love her.
And
I love her.
And I got on Diva after like, I don't think I'd ridden in 3 months. And she's like, what is even going on here? Like, you guys are so good together. And I was like, okay. It's kind of like living in a bit of a bubble of like, okay, like this is really cool to get a bit of, that feedback from outside of like, okay, I think I'm actually like heading in the right direction with things. I mean, I do have a lot of great input from, people like yourself and just like the way that I love to learn, the way that my brain works. And this idea of the wanted and unwanted behavior is a really interesting one for me. Because I think it's so easy to, first of all, have a reaction to unwanted behavior. Found that was a really big thing for myself, is one of the emotions, and I chatted about it on the podcast a little bit, is one of the emotions that I have, I think, battled with my whole life is this, and maybe it's not even an emotion. I have a fairly close, sort of not a lot of a gap between something happening and a reaction coming up in my system. And I think that's the case for many of us. I would say that I've never been diagnosed, but I probably sit more on a neurodivergent spectrum. And I have a pretty strong emotion that comes up around that. And so sometimes when those unwanted, I put them in quote, behaviors come up, I find this rush in me, more, I think, along the lines of there's a part of me that feels unsafe in that moment, right? And is going into self-protective mode in that moment. And so I really wanted to ask you about your work around this idea of, when we label wanted or unwanted behaviors, what can we bring to the table so that it's not so black and white anymore? Because as you say, everything is an expression. Everything is an expression of an emotion in a horse or a feeling. And it's all valuable and information, right?
Yeah. So before I get into that, I just want to shout out to Shannon from Humming Horse on Instagram. I found her Instagram when she still had like 400 and something followers. She's got over 1,000 now. And I started reading her posts and I was like, who is this woman? I need to be friends with you. Holy cow. And to be honest, like, we did a 3-part series together on trauma, which I loaded onto my Patreon, and she was just sublime. And if I could pick one person on planet Earth to have a lesson with, it is with Shannon, honestly.
Shout out to
Shannon.
She lives an hour away from me.
Shut up.
An hour.
I need to come to the Pacific Northwest because there's something happening in the Pacific Northwest with horse people, because Kathy Sierra is nearby as well.
Elsa Sinclair.
And she and I, She
Uh-huh.
and I get along really well. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I do have some plans if 2022 works out all right. I do have some plans to come to the West Coast US, but we'll see. Anyway, but
And
Shannon's
Canada.
awesome.
You
So
got to come to
and
Canada.
Canada, yeah, as well.
Awesome.
Anyway, so fear is really important, and this is again emotional horsemanship. Fear is there to inform you about what is safe and what isn't. And don't listen to fear at your peril. So when horses do something that is unwanted, it is there to inform you. And if that unwanted behavior, quote, unwanted behavior, makes you feel frightened, be aware of that. Acknowledge that fear and say, oh, this fear is here to inform me that I might not be safe right now. So maybe that's a redirective moment to say, I'm not going to ask that question again of my horse today, or I'm going to rethink my protocol. I'm going to rethink my
Mm.
setup. Maybe I will use protected contact. Maybe I'll work on something else and come back to this in months or years' time and it will be better. I don't know. But if it is making me afraid to ask for one thing from the horse and they're giving me something else, I need to listen to that. And I need to listen to that fear in my body. And I need to connect with it and make peace with it. Horses freely feel their fear and they use their fear to survive and to thrive. So fear is not our enemy, and fear is something we make peace with. Does that make fear pleasant? No, it's not supposed to feel pleasant. But again, we need to get out of this concept of constantly needing to feel pleasant and comfortable all the time. Certainly there'll be moments that feel like sliding into a warm bath, like that kind of feeling with your horse. We're just like, oh my God, this is bliss, this is awesome. And there will be times that will feel the opposite. And we need to embrace that because that is the spectrum, that is living, that is life. And why are we trying to box life into these comfortable, digestible, controllable parameters? Because it just frustrates the heck out of horses, more some than others. And so, reactivity, if you're having a constant, huge reactivity to unwanted behavior, you might have some unaddressed issues around
Mm-hmm.
fear. You might have, like what Shannon and I discussed, some stuck energy in your body relating to a trauma. It could be directly related to horses or not. And in that case, maybe you should do some work on that before you come back and try to train that thing with horses. If I can give a little example, I was teaching a lesson a few weeks ago in Granada City to a lovely young girl and a horse she was optioning to buy. And this stable's right next to an army base, and there's constant helicopters going overhead. And she had one ride a year ago with this mare where the helicopter went overhead and her horse went over threshold because the horse was tense and in pain, bad fitted saddle, etc. So it was just like a trigger stacking event. Horse bolted, she came off. It was really scary for her. So now every time the helicopters go overhead, she freezes. And she was in this lesson with me, and I saw the helicopter coming, and her whole expression in the saddle changed. She just started
Mm-hmm.
freezing up. I'm like, are you okay? She went, yep. I went, no, you're not. Don't lie to me. I'm like, you're not okay. And I said, okay. And we just stood with her while the helicopter went overhead. And I asked her to get off the horse. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
well, what happened? What happened with regards to the helicopter? She told me about the bolting. I said, okay, do you trust me? She said, yes, I do. I said, okay, we're going to do an exercise now. No one's here. The stable was empty. No one was there to shame her or watch her. I said, close your eyes, and I want you, when I count to three, to open your eyes and run to the other end of the arena. And it was a
Mm.
big arena. And I
Mm.
want you to run for your life. I went 1, 2, 3, and she ran, and she took 5 steps. I said, nah, come back. You didn't mean it. Come back. I saw it in her body.
Yep.
She half-assed it. She phoned
Yep.
it in, didn't mean it. I said, no, I really need you to summon up that you are going to run for your life right now. 3,
Mm.
2, 1. And off she went. We did it a couple of times. She came back, got back on the horse, and suddenly the horse was more forward moving without having to use more
Mm-hmm.
leg because that blockage in her body had been removed. And so sometimes if you take that feeling, which is the uncontrollable feeling of running or bolting, and you experience it in a way which you can control it, and then you have a point of reference in your body for that moment when a
Mm.
horse bolts, you're not afraid because you know what bolting feels like because you've bolted when you've been in control. So you're not feeling like, oh my God, this is fear, but not just fear, panic, because I'm looking into the future, I'm seeing black. I have no point of reference for this experience right now.
Mm. Mm.
So the reason why, for myself, why I've not been afraid on many horses is because I've done some pretty scary with my body as a dancer.
Mm-hmm.
And so there haven't been yet many things with the horses I have yet to be exposed to where they moved in a way where I went, I have no point of reference to this. I just went, oh, I have a point of reference to this and I'm not afraid of it because my body has been to extreme places physically. So I know how to like go with this moment or to recover from a fall or how to fall if I need to. So yeah, that was something I did in the lesson. And that was part of an example of how to honor fear, honor it without blocking it, use it, overcome it, and then succeed beyond it. And that's really what I'm passionate about with people and horses because you can do it with horses too. It's easier with horses, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's easier.
Yeah. What an interesting, I love that sense of, I'd never thought of it that way. If I've never experienced that, or if I don't have a point of reference, then of course it wouldn't be.
It's going to make you afraid and going to make you panic because it's putting you in a highly aroused situation where the room for error is small and it's new for you. That's a trigger stacking.
Wow.
So this is part of empathy driven riding. Empathy is not just, oh, I feel sorry for you. That's sympathy.
Yeah.
That's different. Empathy says my body has a point of reference for what you are going through right now. So I know how you feel on a physical, physiological, emotional level. So dancers, we've all seen those like Hollywood movies like Black Swan and stuff like this where, you know, it's this horribly traumatic kind of industry. And yeah, they're all kind of Hollywood, but I've been there and I've come back. And when I did my last show, it was Swan Lake. My last show was Swan Lake. One of my colleagues turned to me to say goodbye and he said, "You got out alive." That's what he said. You got out alive. And there was no irony in it. You got out alive.
Wow.
So I've been in that industry and I can say that all of it is true. I don't know a single female dancer that hasn't had an issue with her body or with food. And so it's a really toxic atmosphere and it's a very insulated community. And the practices of how they treat people in some places, not everywhere, in some places are really questionable. And so what is a dancer? A dancer is a creature of movement that performs movement, learns movement. I can't handle it. Oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah, a dancer is a creature of movement that doesn't have a voice and is performing often under pain or duress, and you're supposed to push through it. There's an unspoken expectation to push through it. I even had a superior in my company tell me in English, dancers don't talk. You do what I say. And so many horses live this way. They don't have language to communicate. They can't use language, though they try to communicate in thousands of different ways to us, their displeasure. They're expected to perform, often under pain and duress that is unacknowledged for people who have maybe problems with their ego or problems with sacrificing or punishing in order to get a beautiful artistic result, that's worthwhile somehow, and all this sort of nonsense. So when I met horses that had suffered under those kind of quote regimes, not only did I intellectually, thinkingly understand all of that, I empathetically had a point of reference in my body for that. And I would look at these horses in the eye and I'm like, babe, I know where you've been. I know where you are. I'm right there with you. Let's get out of it together. I know how to overcome this from a relational perspective. I know how to ask things from you without making you feel that way anymore. I know how to listen to you when you start to tell me what it's been like for you. And this is part of the thawing process that Shannon and I discussed on Patreon that all these things come to the surface. I know Warwick Schiller talks about a piece of research about polar bears that were tranquilized and they were running when they went down, and when they came out of the tranquilizer, they were also running. So as you went in, so you come out. And I do what I call holding space for horses when they come out of these states of shutdown, and listen to them and allow them to express themselves about how it has been for them. Yeah. And I've got 2 horses at the moment, 2 of, I'm sure, what will be many to come. I work with a lot of horses that aren't mine, but I own 2 of my own, and they're 2 very different. One is like my heart horse that I just got really lucky with him, and is that once in a lifetime kind of connection. And the other one sort of fell into my lap. He was my COVID quarantine pony, who's had a really rough life and a lot of pain. And today, actually, the vet came and did his teeth, and we found scars on his tongue from bits, and in his mouth from sharp teeth. And he's got a tumor in his sheath, which makes collection impossible, and all these sorts of things. And holding space for him at times has been volatile. At times it's been difficult. And usually he does behavior I don't want, usually. And yeah, it's frustrating when the horse does something you don't want, because you're like, oh, again. But that's my humility check-in. That's my humility check-in. I'm here to hold space for you. I don't have any expectation of you. You say what you need to say. And when you're ready to talk, we'll talk. And when you're ready to do, we'll do. But until that moment, what else do you have to say? Yeah, and that's been kind of powerful to watch him transform. He no longer attacks people, so that's good.
Yay.
And he can kind of, share food with other horses now. That's good. So
amazing.
Yeah, that's just a few things on that. Yeah.
Thank you. And it
No
makes
problem.
me giggle a little bit, not that part of it, but when you talk about feeling things in your body, because I always had, so my boyfriend now rides with me, and I put him on both my girls, and he's like he's really ridden maybe twice before in his life. And he's like the most natural rider, like,
oh my God, don't you want to
ever.
slap him?
Oh my God.
You want to slap him?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm like, how is this possible? I've been doing this for, oh my God, like 30 plus years. And he's just like, nothing phases him. And then I realized, oh, he was a dancer, and he was also trained in aerial arts. So
oh my God, we're out there.
Right. And so he was doing crazy stuff, like literally jumping off bridges on bungees and having to meet up with people in the middle. And so for him, the movements, this makes so much more sense, because I realized, all these movements, anything that my horses could do, he has so much comfort around. It's so in his system to balance.
Because trotting is not more scary than jumping off a bridge and doing bungee jumping.
It's not. It can't be.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
And so that just clicked into place of like, oh, these people that are just so natural, it'd be so interesting to know what their backgrounds were prior to that, what their movement sort of spectrum is, right? Because I know that my capability as a dancer assisted and continues to assist my, me as a rider, right? And I now, my dance is pretty much exclusively, I hope to get back into Latin. That was my thing before COVID, but more exclusively like 5 rhythms and more ecstatic dance practices. And I know without a doubt that contributes, that freedom of movement contributes to my ability as a rider.
Absolutely.
And as a partner.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, because I know there's going to be some people listening who'll be like, well, I'm in my 50s and I never danced, so that's great for you two. But what about me? That's leaving me out of the picture. Well, stuff you, right?
Yeah.
I just want to say, you don't have to be a trained dancer to be good at this.
I've
met people that have had a 9-to-5 desk job their whole lives and never did sports. And they had this because they were profoundly kinesthetic.
Yes.
They just had a really good relationship to their body in that sense. But I just have to say that if you have breath in your body, you can learn this. And it's not learning anything so much as you're remembering something that was conditioned out of you. Yes. So it's a little bit of deprogramming. It's a little bit of reconnecting. It's a whole lot of fumbling and stumbling and self-connection and a whole lot of self-deprecating laughter. You got to be able to just look like a fool sometimes around your horses and just kind of shake it all out, and we can get there and we can connect to our bodies again, and you can do this. Like, I've
Oh,
seen people, my youngest client's been 17 and my oldest has been 70, and they're still there
mm,
all in the same boat together. So yeah, if you have breath in your body, you can do this. And this is really good, especially for people who have physical limitations as well, because this way of working with horses takes into account and fundamentally ameliorates any kind of physical restrictions you may have. So if you've got a bad knee or a bad back, so long as you've got doctor's approval to ride and train and walk and all that sort of stuff,
mhm,
we can work around it, because this is not about prescribing correct and incorrect movements for you, no less than we say correct and incorrect movements for the horse.
mm,
All movement is good movement, and we can work around it because this is way more improvisation based. There'll be a foundation process where you're learning certain techniques, and usually these techniques are really, really simple and really, really pared down. And then after there, we can spring off into way more improvisational ways of being, riding, and doing with horses.
mm.
And that really honors people of all physicalities, all ages, all abilities. I don't want to go there, but I'm going to go there. I'm really proud of the people who have come through my doors, which with my business, which is primarily online, because I see all religions represented. I've got people who are completely Muslim with their hijab and the whole lot, and I've got people who are Jewish and people who are Christian and people who are non-denominational, and I've got a whole range of gender spectrums and ages in my business and a whole bunch of languages and backgrounds. And we really do honor everyone, including people who've come from a variety of equestrian backgrounds as well. So
Mm.
if you were that hardcore competition kids at the dressage ring every weekend with all of those goals, and you want to learn to do this together in this way, you're welcome.
Mm,
If you
mm.
have never been to a competition in your life and you're just starting out and you've got your first horse and you feel you're in over your head, you are welcome. Like, I really am serious about that. That's really important to me,
Awesome.
because I know what it feels like to be excluded. And I would never wish that on anyone else.
Mm,
And so I'm really practicing what I preach there. And I think that's really important, that
mm.
um, more service providers and professionals can kind of be a bit more inclusive.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Lockie. And
Mm.
unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. This has been an amazing conversation, and I think that's a
Oh,
perfect place to for today. Bring it to a close. But I have a
yeah.
feeling there's more conversations in our future here.
Oh, I'd love
So
to.
yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
I want to end off today with two things. First is any resources, sort of one or two things that jump to mind for you that you'd like to share today from your faves right now.
My faves. My faves. I mean, if people aren't following Kathy Sierra on Instagram yet, please do.
I'm not
And
yet. I
please,
need to. Okay.
oh my,
Okay.
oh my God,
Uh,
Alexa, I'm giving you a digital hand slap. Get on it.
I,
She's in your neighborhood,
I know it's
man. Like,
crazy, and I've been told about her
her.
like seven
Oh,
times. Oh
oh,
yeah.
I'm connecting you today.
Okay.
I'm connecting you because she needs to be your next podcast guest. And she's very much in a bridge burning mood at the moment because she's fed up. She's fed up with
Yeah.
all of it, and she's ready just to tell names out of school and go there. And she's in a really cool mood at the moment. Anyway,
Okay.
she had a background in tech, and she wrote several books on programming. And now she has brought the science of pain into horsemanship and horse training. And she's created an entire community. She says she's the anti-guru, but people still look up to her like maybe they would. But her pain science course in horses, I think, is one of the most important things that's come out in the last sort of 10
Mm,
to 20 years. I mean, if
okay.
I can be so bold to say,
Yeah.
her pain science course is amazing. It's not expensive. And the things there can really start to be a game changer for a lot of
Mm.
horses, and really overcome a lot of those common misconceptions. Again, like I said earlier, Shannon on Humming Horse, I read every
Mm-hmm.
post she does. I read every post she does. Other than that, you'll find me in my research days with my horses on research days, or with my clients
Yep.
on research days, and actually having feet on the ground and seeing what inspires me there. Or you'll find me at like researchgate.com, sort of trailing through different studies and stuff like that. I like to keep my fingers on the pulse of what's sort of coming down the pipeline science wise, but I don't get fixated on that at all. But yeah, those are two people that
Awesome.
people need to be following.
Awesome. That's great. And how do
Mm.
they follow you, Lucky? How do they find you?
So you can follow me on emotional.horsemanship on Instagram, Facebook at emotional.horsemanship. I have a website, emotionalhorsemanship.com, and you can find me on Patreon as well, Emotional Horsemanship on Patreon.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Okay, everyone, go check it out. Lucky, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's been my honor. It's been my honor. Full circle moment for me to be speaking with you, Alexa. I'm so pleased. Thank you so
Oh,
much for having me. I'm humbled by it.
you're so, so welcome. Thank you for being here. And
Thank
thanks,
you.
everyone, for tuning in today, listening. I hope you learned a thing or two. I know I did. And we'll see you again soon. I've enjoyed some amazing sessions with podcast listeners and their horses over the last several months and connected with people around the world and horses and horse herds, and I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity. If you'd like to connect with me for a session, you're always welcome to reach out, Alexa at alexalinton.com. And if you ever have a podcast guest that you'd love to hear from, just message me and I will try to get them on. Thanks again for listening. It's been a pleasure. I love hearing from each and every one of you about what you're learning and what's changing for you and your horses. So thank you for that. It fills my heart. Okay, have a great day. Bye for now.